Hi, everyone. This is Sarah. I am the founder of Mappy Hour. We are a community of urban dwelling outdoor enthusiasts. We have chapters all over the US and are always looking to expand. So if you head over to mappyhour.org and you don't see your chapter yet, definitely hit us up. I'm Sarah at outdoorfest.com. And tonight, as part of our Mappy Hour live series, we're going to be learning about crafting awesome backpacking itineraries because hopefully all of you will be getting out this summer, and I know it can be a little bit intimidating when you start planning, just figuring out all the different pieces of it and how to do it, especially when you might be offline and be doing it for the first time. So before we get started, I have a few announcements. One is I will be your moderator tonight. So, below the stream in the comments, if you want to say hi, say where you're from, if you've been backpacking before, if you have and have experience that you want to share with people on like how do you craft itineraries, how do you figure out where to go, what are the hardest parts for you, any hacks you've learned, would be amazing to hear everyone sharing. So get in the comments and say hi. And again, I will be in there, so please be kind, respectful, curious, all those good things. No harassment of any kind will be tolerated. And then before we jump into it, my other two announcements. Next week, we have another Mappy Hour Live. We're actually talking to a bike packer, John, and he actually did a ride last summer on the Underground Railroad ride path, which is a route that goes through the South to DC. And he did it as a form of advocacy so that more people could see that there are Black bikers, and he's creating a film around it. And so we're really lucky to be able to talk to him about his experience, about his connection with history on this ride, and where the film is going. So that's next week. Hopefully everyone can join as well. And finally, before we bring on Yvonne, I just want to say thank you to our sponsors. So this is all happening because we have awesome sponsors like the North Face, Fat Map, and Sierra Nevada Brewing Company. So, thank you as always. It really helps us to create these. And if you registered on mappyhour.org, you will be getting a 30-day Fat Map Explore trial membership. So get excited for that. We'll send that out tomorrow. And with that, I'm so excited to introduce you all to Yvonne. And here we go. Welcome, Yvonne, to Mappy Hour.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I'm super excited to be chatting about backpacking tonight. So just before we dive in, a little bit about me. I just got into the outdoors maybe 5 to 6 years ago, was very much not an outdoorsy person, and went on a first backpacking trip that really kind of blew my mind. And since then, I've hiked the John Muir Trail, climbed Aconcagua, which is this really tall mountain in Argentina, just taught myself how to ski a couple of years ago, really started to dive deeper into the outdoors, and a few months ago launched this free weekly newsletter called Bewilder. I'm based in California, so what Bewilder does is we actually design one-of-a-kind camping and backpacking itineraries every week. So if you're ever out in California, highly recommend subscribing to us. It's free, really informative, and it will give you a sense of just like where to go backpacking, camping in California. But without further ado, let's talk about how we design these itineraries. So the first step is knowing yourself. If I were in your shoes, ask yourself, how long can I hike in a day? What's my fitness level? I'm still like crawling out of quarantine, so still working on how many miles I can actually hike. Do I want to go solo? Am I trying to go with friends? Do I want a challenging adventure, or do I want some type of escape? I think being able to set your own goals and just assess where you are in life and what type of trip you want to go on is a really great first step. Secondly, pick a place. I've developed this acronym called TREAD, and the 4 things you really want to think about is topography, region, elevation, and distance. So topography is really kind of like, what kind of adventure do you want to go on? Do you want a coastline? Would you like alpine lakes? Are you interested in a desert adventure, or kind of just like forests and rivers? Understanding the different types of topographies you plan on trekking in will also kind of set the stage for what you're going to need for the rest of the trip. Secondly, pick your region. How far do you want to drive? So this is New York, and it has a lot of different types of ecosystems, wildlife, different aspects of topography that you can probably find outside of coastline in all these different regions. So it's really a question of like, how far away would you like to be exploring? And also thinking about elevation. High altitude hiking is just its own different kind of beast. So really it's anywhere between like 4,900 to 11,500 feet or higher is considered high altitude hiking. And what you really want to think about there is weather is going to be a lot more variable when you're at that elevation. So that includes wind, sometimes a little bit more storm. It's also just colder temperatures usually when you're higher up there, but during the summer, that actually might be a good thing. Trekking above the tree line is also generally a lot more rugged, different types of water sources. You generally also want to be able to take time to acclimatize if you're doing any type of high altitude hiking. Staying at high altitude or somewhere in that elevation range for a night or two will definitely help your body avoid a lot of altitude sickness symptoms, which is usually like nausea, dizziness, a lack of appetite, dehydration. And then also, there's also sometimes less obvious campsites that you can find when you are at that elevation because everything is so vertical. So you're going to have to be a lot more intentional about where you end up settling for the night, really studying maps to be able to better understand where the elevation changes, where there might be like more of an alpine lake or something like that where you can camp next to, which is usually flatter. And finally, there's sometimes campfire regulations. So a lot of this information is built on insights from backpacking in California and doing a lot more mountaineering on this side of the world. So keep in mind that there will be different regulations for different parks. And finally, you just want to talk about distance. Consider loops, out and back, or one-way trails. So really being able to assess like one, what is my personal fitness and where am I actually trying to go? And part of that is asking the elevation and the distance. How many miles do I actually reasonably think I can do in a day, in conjunction with how much vertical climb is involved or how often I'm actually hiking uphill versus on flat ground. Third, find your public land. So there's all different types of places to backpack and particularly camp. They all have their different types of regulations, but generally public land falls into these categories where there's national forests, which are often much more dog friendly, much more accessible. They have an easier permitting process most of the time. National parks are probably your gnarliest and most popular places to camp and backpack. So you'll often see a lot more visitors, busier trails, things like that, but a lot more infrastructure as well. Bureau of Land Management, and that is usually less infrastructure, so you'll find a lot more dispersed camping. Some of them also have campgrounds, but in terms of dispersed camping, they're usually much more lax in terms of pets, usually much more lax in terms of permits. So a lot of people like to camp on BLM land. The Army Corps of Engineers are often found like around water recreational areas, so lakes, rivers, things like that. They're actually part of the Department of Defense, but they have a bunch of, sometimes they have some walk-in campsites, which are great for beginner campers, where you are not, or beginner backpackers, where you're not actually trekking for 5 miles a day, but just like a mile and a half into a campsite. You're getting a taste of dispersed camping, and you can then hike back to society with all of its amenities. State parks are very well known. County parks are often another overlooked aspect. Same with local parks. They have something very similar to what I just described for the Army Corps of Engineers, where you can backpack maybe a mile and a half in, or it's more of like a walk-in campsite, but it gives you a sense of what it means to kind of carry everything that you need and camping out there. Fourth, select the season and the dates. So there are just different pros and cons for when you are camping in the spring, summer, fall, or winter. I will say that during the spring, some of the pros is that it's wildflower season, usually April and May. It's also not as buggy quite yet. Cons, depending on where you are, especially in California, there might be still some snow on the trails, which means you're kind of like in this weird shoulder season of, should I bring snow equipment or should I not? Am I going to just post hole my way through the snow, or is it going to be easy backpacking? The weather can also be a little bit unpredictable because it's still the spring and things are warming up. Summer, warm nights and warm days, which is great for swimming. It's really buggy, which I really do not like. And there's also a bunch of crowded trails, which is obviously not as fun if you're like trying to vie for trail space. I'm a big believer that depending on where you go, you can always find space for yourself or peace and quiet and solitude for yourself in the backcountry, especially. But that's something to take into consideration, especially when it comes to permits or places that are requiring permits. Fall, less crowds, less bugs, which is great. There are shorter days though, and it's chillier weather. And winter, which I'm going to give a shout out for because most people do not do winter camping, but as a result, they don't get to experience the zero crowds, animals, and bugs, and just the magnificent scenery that comes from winter camping. You're talking about like frozen lakes. A lot of my best camping memories have actually been winter camping, but I will emphasize that there are trade-offs and that you're going to have different types of equipment. Water sources are a little trickier. Sometimes you're spending more time melting snow, or lakes and streams that would typically be available during the summer are obviously frozen. And there are some really, really cold nights. But I do think that the trade-offs are worth it. So something to consider is, yeah, once you pick the location, tread, better understand, where you want to go, then start thinking about what time of year you want to visit X place. Learn the route, it would be the next step. And AMP is like a really easy way to remember how to assess the trail conditions, map it, and then score your parking and permits. So those are the next stages of research I would recommend once you've gotten down the location and the season. So assessing trail conditions. For better or for worse, this is probably the most frustrating part about creating a backpacking itinerary. This is my process, but really it's just going to as many different sources of information as possible to get the latest trail conditions. And what you really want to better understand is what are the water sources, depending on the season that you are trying to go backpacking in. Where do people typically camp when they go backpacking? And is that in line with your mileage and where you want to be trekking to? What's the exposure? How much shade is involved? That can be really helpful in terms of like what to wear as well as where to camp. And then finally, weather. Is there snow on the ground? Are there usually storms during this particular season? How does that affect the trail conditions and the trail maintenance? These all kind of work together and affect one another. But in terms of the different steps that I take, first thing is often visiting the park website and calling the park ranger, asking for their expertise. Sometimes it can be difficult to get a hold of a park ranger because you often have to call them during the day. But once you do, most of them have been generally very helpful. And I would try and read up on that. All trails would actually be my next step, is actually finding the trail that you're looking at, seeing if there are more recent reviews, and even going past like historical reviews for the previous year, for the previous season, will give you a better sense of what to expect. I also search on Instagram based on the location and checking out their most recent photos. Sometimes that's a good way of getting, real life updates about what the trail conditions are like at any particular park or forest. Twitter is hit or miss, but that's like another option too. I've also joined a bunch of Facebook backpacking groups where often I will just ask people, what has anyone been to X place? What was the trail like? Would you recommend it? Where would you camp? Whatever questions you might have about the trail conditions, posting it on a backpacking group could be a really easy way of getting a sense of what it's like. Reddit is also a great resource for similar reasons with the Facebook backpacking group. Google backpacking forums. That's another way of just kind of getting a sense. Sometimes a lot of these blog posts can be a little dated, so these forums are really helpful of getting more up-to-date information. This gets a little bit more extreme, and it depends on more how backcountry you're really going. But as someone who's also gone on the Hayduke Trail, which is not a very popular backpacking trail and doesn't have a lot of information because it kind of goes more like off country. You can call a local guiding service and ask some of their experts there. They usually have a lot of local institutional knowledge. I would also recommend a gear store. So where I live in the Inyo National Forest area near Mammoth Lakes, there's Mammoth Mountaineering Supply. Their store associates are often going outdoors all the time, and that's like a perk of living where we live. And so asking them, hey, where's a good place to go backcountry skiing, or hey, where's a good place to go backpacking, they often have really great recommendations too. And finally, a little bit more old school, but it works like a charm. It's just buy or borrow a book or trail guide, and you can look up that on Amazon. They'll deliver right to your house. It does take a little bit more time in terms of actually doing the research, but I've learned that sometimes those books and trail guides have been really great, especially for winter camping, because it's not super popular on all trails, for instance. Secondly, you want to map it. So once you kind of start to understand your route, you want to be able to customize it. I've listed a bunch of different resources here: All Trails, Fat Map, CalTopo, Gaia GPS are some of my favorites that I've used. And also Guthook Guides actually comes with a guide, so you can just like purchase the guide or the map for a particular trail. They usually do like more epic trails. Like I think I did that for the John Muir Trail. They might have something for Hayduke, something that's like much more contained and well traveled. And then a lot of people advocate by having a physical map. I don't necessarily buy these topographic maps myself because I do rely a little bit more on the digital GPS version and having to charge my phone. But quite frankly, you should always have printouts or some physical version. And I do have printouts of my maps just in case, especially if you're going somewhere that is more remote than a more popular backpacking trek. Parkings and permits. So one thing you want to think about, depending on what your trail is and what route you pick, is sometimes you want to arrange a shuttle at the end. If it's out and back, if it's just like one way and you're just trekking to a destination, the Lost Coast Trail is a very popular trail in California, for instance, where you do have to arrange a shuttle at the very end. We also did that for a section of the Hayduke Trail. It's just an additional fee, but sometimes it's worth it, where you park your car where you'll end up, and then the shuttle will come pick you up and take you to the trailhead, and then you'll start hiking. And yeah, it's relatively easy, a little bit more of just like logistical planning, but it's great for groups. Sometimes you might have to wrap your car. This is something that does happen or is required when you are hiking in certain parts of California, especially during Mineral King. It's a marmot situation. Rodents really just like to gnaw at your car. Bears can sometimes get into there too. So really it's just wrapping your car and making sure there's no food or snacks, even if they're unwrapped, left inside. They can be pretty gnarly. Applying for a wilderness permit, sometimes you can pick it up at the trailhead. So sometimes you actually have to apply way far in advance. And in California, certain parks like Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Park, for instance, their park ranger will actually call you a couple weeks before your trip and just make sure that you're familiar with Leave No Trace, you're familiar with what trailhead you're coming in and out of, et cetera, and just talking about some of the more specific criteria around the park. So it's always really good to read up about whether or not those permits are required. Campfire permits too. And in California, for instance, you do have to sometimes apply for a campfire permit, have it print out with you in order to even use your backpacking stove. So it's not even to actually start a campfire, it's purely just to have like an inflammable device outside in nature. 6, invite your friends and prep them. Tell them what kind of route you're going on. It's always helpful to get people to say yes to dates you've already picked instead of trying to crowdsource it. That has always been the most efficient way. Or just like asking them, hey, are you available during these dates, and I'll plan the rest. But what's really essential is that you want to be able to tell them exactly, what the plan is, what route to take, how to prepare, everything from gear, et cetera, to just like what type of weather conditions, or to even, making sure that they're familiar with Leave No Trace. The more that all of you are aligned, even though there might be just one planner in the group, the better the experience will be, because once you're actually out there, people just want to be able to enjoy themselves instead of being reminded, hey, you should be doing that, or don't do that, or, oh, you should have brought that, but you forgot it. Things like that really help out the whole group experience in the end. Get the right gear. Easier said than done, of course, but bear canisters or ursacks, you should definitely check the park website, especially national parks. If you're backpacking in Yosemite's or even the Joshua Trees of the world, they'll have different type of food storage expectations, and sometimes they'll even have like certain bear canisters are approved. Ideally, you want to be able to make sure that you get those type of bear canisters or not, versus not, and just be a lot more thoughtful about what type of equipment that you're bringing, because there are requirements around that. Identifying also what is shared or solo gear. With backpacking, weight is really important. So you want to be able to shave off as much weight or consolidate resources. For instance, sunscreen, maybe just bring one bottle that can be shared among the group instead of everyone having their own 16-ounce bottle. Cooking stoves too, does everyone need to be carrying fuel, or can like you actually share the gear and just allocate this like the same weight around the group? That type of conversation is always really efficient and really helpful to everyone. Bring a water filter or purifier. Sometimes if you're going during the winter, you're not going to be able to actually catch the water. Is there going to be streams around that you can just, dunk a water filter through, et cetera, et cetera? I think thinking those things through when it comes from a gear perspective is really helpful. And then meals and snacks. So does everyone have the right amount of snacks? Oftentimes I find, which is something I've done, is I just overload snacks. I always am somehow fearful of not bringing enough food and somehow starving in the outdoors. That usually hasn't been the case, though that did happen to me in the last 3 days of the John Muir Trail, which is something I'm not proud of. But it's more not that we ran out of food, it was we ran out of calories. So I would say typically being able to pack a day's worth of food into a Ziploc bag so you know exactly what you're going to be eating that day helps you assess how much food you're bringing versus putting an entire bag of trail mix or something like that into the bag. It actually helps to kind of segment all of your snacks and all of your meals so you have a mental model of what you're eating versus trying to pack everything, like all of your favorite goodies, into your backpack, because that's just it's not gonna be fun when you're carrying that up a hill. And finally, a first aid kit, making sure safety first. Don't forget to bring those type of emergency supply in case anything does happen, because by the time things do happen, you're gonna want that first aid kit. Embrace surprises and failures. This is more of a mental model than anything, but I think prepping yourself to really understand that backpacking in nature is going to be filled with fails. I can't tell you how many times I've tried to climb a mountain and never gotten even close to the summit, but that's very much just part of the experience. And it's extremely humbling, but it's also what builds resilience, and what I think personally motivates me to get back out there again is to push myself and to see what I'm made of out there. So yeah, I'd love to take any questions and answers. Sarah, thank you so much for letting me chat about backpacking. This has been awesome.
Great. Hello. That was amazing. Thank you for all those tips.
You're welcome. I'm curious to hear if it's helpful, if there are any questions.
All right. Well, we have one logistics question. Are we going to be able to share this PowerPoint with people afterwards? Is that possible?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely.
Okay, great. So thumbs up on that, Kathleen. We can send this in the email we're going to send to everyone later this week, so you can have access to that. Cool. And so, yeah, just everyone, if you do have questions just about itineraries or crafting them, we do have a professional here with us tonight, so get those questions in. The first one that we have is about water. So how do you figure out where to find water sources, and also if they're still going to be active? Are there places where you find that information, because that's pretty scary to go out there and not know if you're going to have water?
Yeah, so assessing the trail conditions is probably my biggest, the biggest investment that I have, and that's partly because of the water situation. You typically want to start with 1 to 2 liters, and I take on the weight. I start with 2 liters for every backpacking trek. You also want to be resupplying whenever you get a chance. The only thing to consider is the weight. But another way to do that on all trails, you can actually see the blue lines and the lakes and the streams for when there are places to resupply. And I think the only thing you want to take into consideration when you are seeing those water or those streams and those rivers or those lakes is some might be seasonal, depending on like what the climate can be like and what season you're trying to go backpacking in. So that's a little bit variable, but I would often either check with the forest, like the park ranger, and ask them very specifically, like, oh, where would you recommend? I noticed on the map that there's a stream. Is it seasonal? Doing a little bit of your due diligence so you can make the most out of that park ranger's resources and their time. But generally, you'd be able to see a lot of these water resources or those resupply areas on the map, especially if you're using any of the mapping tools. They typically will show like where are the more regular sources of water, and you just want to be able to measure the distance between where you start at the trailhead to where that next water supply, where you're going to be camping. I would typically also try and camp around a water supply. So a lake, a river, it's just nice to have flowing water next to you. It's also just makes it easier to access so you don't have to like hike a ways away. But look, I've also had to hike, 1 mile or a 1 mile or a mile and a half in order to get water for our campsite. So it's been done. It's just not great. Or something like that distance. So more often than not, if you're in alpine situations, especially in California, you're not going to run out of water. Where you will is more like the Joshua trees, the desert, and then you have to be a lot more intentional. And I've done the Haydock Trail, which is in Utah, and you just had to like dunk your water filter into a really disgusting like pond.
And there's water.
And there's water and you can drink it. It just is not as appetizing as like a gurgling brook.
Yeah. And that's like a great point about like the seasonality of it and where you are. And I think it can be hard when you're visiting places, but especially if you're somewhere and you know kind of what traditionally, rainfall is like in that area, you can kind of expect
Exactly.
if something's going to be lower than normal or not. So yeah, that's awesome. Thank you. All right. So let's see what else we've got. Okay. So I don't know if you're going to have the answer to this one, but any tips on getting permits?
Yeah. Honestly, it's just having idea of where you want to go and then understanding the permitting process there. Most of the time it's actually pretty attainable, but you often have to figure out all those things in advance, which is like the season and the dates is pretty critical. And then also like what area you'd like to camp at. The national parks are always going to be the hardest. So like getting a permit in Yosemite, there is a little bit of a process, which is like waking up really early, applying for a permit, and then like crossing your fingers and doing a little happy dance to make sure you're sending good vibes to whatever luck is involved to scoring a permit.
That's the real tip. Happy dance.
Yeah. But most of the time, like even in California, it's very doable. I think what is missing from that permitting aspect is the fact that most people don't understand that a lot of these national forests, a lot of these BLM land areas have so many stunning places like scenery, natural landscapes to explore that are almost just as good or better than what you'd find in a national park. So I think the irony is that I actually think the permitting process becomes way easier when you realize you can experience something spectacular in Stanislaus National Forest or Lassen National Forest, not necessarily at like Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Park or Lassen Volcanic National Park, where actually you can't even go backpacking in that national park anyway. But I think doing some more research into all these other public lands is a great investment. And I think most backpackers eventually get there, but not necessarily beginners because they just kind of hear about what are most popular and or what they see on Instagram, for instance. But there's every state I think has a ton of beautiful places. And I think it's just a matter of understanding what's in them.
Totally. Yeah. And that's like one of the most fun parts about Mappy Hour is like seeing all the places that people find and then get out to maybe on a short weekend or a 3-day weekend. That's not necessarily like the 2-week, 3-week Yosemite backpacking trip. Also really cool, but just one option among many.
Yeah, and I'll just quickly add too, if you're looking for inspiration, sometimes it's just like going onto Google Maps, turning on like the satellite view and just like poking around and being like, oh, what's this lake? And zooming in. And what's really funny is I've done that in California, and some people have left reviews of like certain lakes, like really deep into the Sierra, and left like 1-star reviews or 2-star reviews, basically saying, yeah. They're basically saying like, oh yeah, there's a bunch of like loud campers here. Don't ever come out here, which is absurd because it's so deep into the Sierra. But what they're actually saying is like, this is an amazing place and they don't want many people to find it.
Yeah.
Which I don't condone by any means, but that's like another way of just kind of discovering and expanding your knowledge of where you could potentially backpack.
Interesting. I like that. I don't know how this would be done. I'm just thinking out loud here that like there needs to be like a database that helps you like filter permits and figure out, which ones to apply to when, and if there are any like tips, because I've gone through the permit process for quite a few places and the process is different for each place.
Exactly.
And the timeline is different for each place. And it's just adds so much more work to the planning process, which can be frustrating.
I totally agree.
Yeah. I'll also add that I know one of our Mappy Hour New York City members camped out at the ranger station for a few days until he got one of the walk-in permits at Yosemite. So if you're gung-ho and you have a lot of flexibility in your schedule, that is one strategy.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, that's true. And we did when I did the John Muir Trail, I did walk up.
You did.
And the irony is that we did something similar. Like at 4 a.m., we got to the ranger's office thinking like somehow this is going to be like a sold out concert or something like that, that there's going to be a line. There wasn't. We were kind of there standing in the cold for hours before they opened. We did get our permit though. But yeah, we didn't even we probably could have gone there an hour earlier than they opened and it would have been fine. But that's how paranoid we were, especially for the JMT. But yeah, to your point, you can absolutely do walk-in and that makes it even better.
Yeah. Cool. So Harriet wants to know, what do you wish someone had told you, but you ended up learning the hard way?
I wish someone told me what would be, I don't know. I have so many. Okay, well, they all have to do with just like pooping and peeing in the outdoors. Like quite frankly, just like really.
I feel like we could do a whole night about that because I feel like it comes up on every trip I'm on and like it's just a really big topic.
Well, winter camping, I've camped in the wintertime and men have the luxury of being able to pee in a bottle, but women, when I first did it, I just had to like drag my sorry ass out of the tent, like get like blasted with the wind and the cold and like go and then like scurry back in. But I have come to create a hack where actually you can buy a Nutella jar that actually has like a large enough hole, which becomes, if you empty that jar, it is the perfect receptacle for like overnight. Yeah, when you got to go overnight, especially for women, and you don't even have to think twice about it. You just kind of like squat in your tent and just go, and it fits everything. Yeah.
Okay, this is amazing.
That would be the best thing that I had to learn like the hard way after going outside in the winter, which you just don't want to avoid. You wake up basically. You can't even like go back to sleep because you're all cold again. So that's for the hardcore if anyone wants to try that.
That's amazing. Okay, so Nutella, just empty Nutella jar. Bring it with you.
You got to find like the big lid. There's something about, yeah. The hole is really important for women, so you don't even have to like aim.
Perfect. Okay, this is amazing. A lot of love for this tip in the comments. Yeah. All right. How do you find guiding groups for less popular areas?
Oh, that's really interesting. Sometimes you can actually customize you can actually customize tours. So guiding is like very seasonal. A lot of these guides are jumping from place to place depending on where their expertise are, what they love to do. And so they also have, as a result, like pretty flexible schedules. I would ask a guiding service. Sometimes they can accommodate. You can see on their website they do custom trips. But if you have a vision for a trip, for instance, I've wanted to climb Shasta during the winter, which is like not very common. People climb Shasta, in July or August, very reasonably so. But we wanted to get ready for rainier, and so we decided that we wanted to do a winter trek of Shasta. And yeah, we had to like put a customized trip together. It's more expensive, obviously, but if you're already going down the guiding route, I think you probably have an idea that you're looking for some certain amount of expertise and care and preparation. So it's often worth the investment. But yeah, I would actually come in, and then once you've actually done a guiding service or you worked with a guide and you enjoy that guide, typically that guide is like very down to just like work something out with you. And what they'll do is they'll probably have like their guiding company handle the insurance of that arrangement, but more or less they're like happy to accommodate, whatever trip you want to go on.
Totally. Yeah, and I'll also add, I think like most guides on their website are going to have whatever the most popular location is, because that's what, people are most often looking for. But those are usually people that have lived in the area for a really long time and are probably familiar with some of these like lesser known areas that are further out. So I feel
Totally.
like if you find someone in the region, they might actually be able to bring you to some of these other areas.
100%.
Yeah. All right. So Anna is saying she's loving to see the camping trips on your website. What other trips do you have planned for this fall, and where can folks sign up to join you?
Oh, thanks. Thanks, Anna.
Yes.
You can sign up for the weekly newsletter. I think that's where we'll be promoting most of the events. I'm still testing out the events because I know we're kind of coming out of quarantine. The Channel Islands one was totally just me being like, I've been dying to go to Channel Islands and I want some people to come with me.
I want to
So,
go. If I wasn't on the other side of the country, I'd be there.
I know. It would be awesome if everyone could come.
Yes.
But yeah, I think TBD is the most honest answer. I think I'm also trying to figure out, where people want to go, when. I think it's a little late on my end in terms of getting permits, but if people can like swing it, on a Sunday to Tuesday, then maybe it's possible. And if you have ideas for organizing a trip, please email me, Yvonne, Yvonne at bewilder.camp. And yeah, we could totally talk about that and figure out what it would mean to just like recruit some cool people to go.
Love it. All right, Anna, I hear that. Make it happen for the fall. Cool. I think that those are all of the questions that I am seeing. Any other exciting news for Bewilder coming up this summer that you can share yet?
I mean, we're just trying to produce more trips and itineraries for people that feels relatable. I think, whether or not you're like a young parent or a young professional, you're just going to have a different set of criteria for what type of trip you're looking for. And as someone who personally understands the pain of planning a trip, and the time involved, which some people don't have, I think that's exactly what we're trying to address is how can we build a community of people who are willing to share their insights, their outdoor knowledge, and help beginners like really understand what it's like to go outdoors and kind of find their own way. We are not trying to take away like all the pain and discomfort that comes with camping, because honestly that's the most beautiful aspect of it, is really being able to reconnect with nature and finding yourself out there. But we do want to save time where you're just like poking in Facebook groups, Reddit groups, calling park rangers, checking websites. Like that process seems unreal, and I can't believe that's still the way it is. But yeah, if you have any ideas, if you have any trips or itinerary requests, please send them my way. I love that feedback. It helps give me a sense of like, yeah, where people are dying to go to and how we can help.
Amazing. All right, we got one more question. Do you have any solo trip plans in the works?
Yes. Yeah, that's a great question. I've definitely done some solo trips. Any trip could honestly be a solo trip, but if you want like specific feedback in terms of like what would be like a good solo adventure, totally depends on preferences, I guess. Like some people have said that they don't want to go too far solo, but yeah, I mean, the answer is yes. I think the question is just like, yeah, what are you looking for on a solo trip? I'd love to know that.
Okay, so Ariel, email Yvonne and make a specific request.
Yes.
You can make it happen.
Yeah, definitely. Because I think you won't be alone. There's a
Yeah,
lot of other people who are interested in going on solo trips too. It's a good signal for us just to know like, oh, okay, this is something that would be helpful to a lot more people.
absolutely. Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of your expertise and tips tonight. Everyone, go check out Bewilder, and especially if you're in California or traveling to California, because there's so much good stuff. And I'll close out tonight with just a thanks again to Fat Map, Sierra Nevada, and the North Face for supporting this, and hope to see everyone soon. So good night, y'all.
Thank you.